everyone. Today we'll be doing history lesson 1. We'll start our history topics with the first chapter, the making of a global world. Taking this chapter into consideration, it is a very the part of this chapter which you will be needing to evaluate in your board examination is a very short part, only 3 subtopics. Hence, this makes it one of the easiest history chapters in your syllabus to learn and score good marks. So, first of all, we have notes on this side and the chapter on this side. We'll be reading. I'll be reading and explaining side by side. Meanwhile, you can also take a look at the notes on this side and note them down. We'll soon make these notes available on our website as well. You can check it out. Okay. So the making of a global world. We all You have heard of the word globalization, right? But how this globalization came into being? Like today we have we say Vasubhan, we say the world is a global village. But how does this global village came into being? We'll be tracing the histories of globalization in this chapter. The topic that we need to consider for board exams is only the first part, the pre-modern world. That is what happened before the level of globalization that we have today came into being. So on this part, basically we are talking about the roots of globalization. Okay, this chapter explores the interconnectedness of the world economy over time, tracing the history of globalization. It is divided into different phases, but we'll only be considering only one phase, that is pre-modern world before the 19th century. Okay. Globalization existed through trade routes like the Silk Road. I guess you have heard of the word Silk Road. That is famous for actually, it is an Asian road which is very famous for traveling of silk. That is a silk that was made in China. How did it came into being? Like went to different places, went to Europe, became the desire of every noble in the Europe through this Silk Road. But this not only silk did not travel through these roads. Spices, culture, religion, philosophies also traveled through these roads. The Silk Road connected Asia, Europe, and Africa. Okay, goods traveled, culture traveled, and ideas also spread through merchants, priests, and travelers who traveled on these roads. And even colonial conquest and voyages of discovery that happened later in the period, like Columbus and Vasco da Gama, marked the early steps of European expansion. Through these roads, not only goods traveled, culture traveled, ideas spread, but also later the colonial conquest and voyages of discovery also happened through these roads. This part basically, we are all discussing the roots of globalization. We are only saying that globalization exists before modern transportation came into being. Okay. Before modern transportation came into being, globalization has already started. In pre-modern world, long distance interactions already created early forms of global interconnectedness. From even as far as 3000 BC, societies like Indus Valley in India were involved in trade with West Asia. Travelers, including traders, monks, and pilgrims, carried not just goods, but as I said, ideas were carried, skills were carried, values, philosophies, and religious beliefs across continents traveled through these roads. In ancient time, I guess you have heard of the barter system. After barter system, cowrie shells were used as an earliest form of currencies, which were exchanged across Asia and Africa. Now this is all the good part. Even the bad part traveled through these roads, that is diseases. Before, we were so closely connected, like we can take an airplane from here and go in just 12 hours to the other end of the world, to the Americas or to any other country. It is like saying it is a one step away. You can go to the airport, sit on a plane, and you are in a different land and a different country. Back then it was not so easy to travel. Hence, we can say that all the countries or a region was isolated from the rest of the world. Isolation means that if a disease spread through this part, like we had a global pandemic, why did it spread so easily and to all the parts of the world so fast? Because of transportation. It was so easy for people to travel from one place to another, that even the diseases, the germs they carried through went to the other country and spread. But back then it was not so easy for diseases to travel through different regions to different continents as such, because the transportation was not well developed. Hence, when people started to use these roads to travel far beyond their region, the countries in which they had stayed for so long, they carried the diseases that were specific to that region to another region. And because those people were not immune to the sickness, basically they were their reactions due to these diseases were severe in them, which led to even destruction of whole populations of that area as well. These diseases were used as biological weapons by many colonialists for their conquest and expansion of Europe. We'll talk about this in the later section of conquest, diseases and trade. Now we have discussed the roots of globalization. We'll move on to Silk Roads link the world. Now, Silk Routes link the world, as we just talked about Silk Road. Silk Road, basically the name, it was famous for actually transporting silk from China to other parts of the world, hence the name Silk Road and Silk Routes. But over time, not only silk traveled through this, even as we said, other goods, spices traveled, culture of a particular region traveled to other parts of the world. Even there were, I would say, ideas travelers went and documented other countries' culture and came back to their country and told them. Hence it was cultural expansion and cultural exchange happening. Ideas were ideas of a certain philosophy from a certain part of the world went to other, and they made a new philosophy out of it, etc. Now, technically, we'll use the words we have in our book. Technically, the Silk Routes were a network of overland maritime trade paths that connected vast regions of Asia, Europe, and North Africa. Now, this was named after the Chinese silk that was a major export. But these routes existed before the Christian era. That is, before the Christianity spread, or origin of Christianity, these routes existed even before that. And they remained active until the 15th century. Okay. Now, famous for silk, even Chinese pottery, Indian textiles, and Southeast Asian spices were traded with gold and silver that flowed from Europe to Asia in exchange. That is, today we wait for foreign exchange. Dollar is supreme. In the past, Chinese and Indian textiles were worth a lot of gold and silver from Europe. Okay, that time China and India were the major nations that dominated the world. Gold and silver flowed from Europe to Asia in exchange. Now, but these routes, as I told you, were more than just trade channels. They were also crucial for cultural exchange. Very important point, because although the route was named after a good silk, but it was through these routes that cultural exchange between countries happened, philosophies were developed, even religions were spread and developed into certain like religions like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam spread through these routes carried by missionaries and preachers. Thus, the Silk Route stand as a powerful example of early globalization, where commerce and culture moved side by side across continents. This is a very important line. Do note it down. Silk Route is a powerful example of early globalization, where commerce and culture, they moved side by side across continents and the world. Now, the next topic we'll be looking at is this in your book, Food Travels, Spaghetti and Potato. Now, why these specifically? Because these food were staple foods of a country and helped many poor people to overcome hunger. And it also has negatives also, so we'll just look at our notes now. Food is a powerful example of global cultural exchange in the pre-modern and early modern world. Travelers and traders often introduce new crops and food habits to the different regions. फूड इज़ अ पावरफुल एग्जाम्पल, क्योंकि एंशियंट टाइम में फूड की कमी बहुत थी. दैट इज़ हमारे मॉडर्न हाई यील्ड वेराइटीज़ ऑफ सीड्स नहीं थे उस टाइम पर. Output of land was low and population was gradually increasing. Hence food became an important part. Like if a crop is high yielding in a certain part, people would take it back to their country and plant it in hopes of growing it and overcoming hunger. So it became a global cultural sign exchange. Food was a major item that was exchanged across continents, and in pre-modern and early modern world, it remained a powerful sign of global exchange even in early modern world. Travelers and traders often introduce new crops and food habits to different regions. Of course, this is very important. For instance, it is believed the noodles from China may have inspired Italian spaghetti. Like today, we basically say, some people say that both are noodles, but it has historical significance. Like if a traveler went to China, he discovered noodles, he thought they were tasty. He came back to his own country and may have inspired Italian spaghetti, that the classic Italian taste he developed for people specific to his region. We enjoy both though, right? Possibly introduced through Arab traders to Sicily. Okay, Arabs, we will define Arab region as Central Asia. People from them basically got goods from China, traveled to Italy, Sicily, and along with the goods, they took the culture of the one country to another country. Okay, similar foods also existed in India and Japan, suggesting widespread Asian cultural contact. Like ramen, Japan is famous for its ramen. It is also a type of noodle, right? What foods do you think in India are similar to noodles from China? I guess vermicelli, that is jave. We ate sweet and sour and spicy jave as well, which are very similar to noodles from China. Chow mein is also developed from. Technically, it is inspired by Chinese cuisine, right? Now, moving on, many foods we now consider common. Okay, every country nowadays has potatoes, maize, tomatoes, and chilies, groundnuts, and sweet potatoes. In their country, we are growing it, right? They are very important crops for every country. Even India grows lots of them. But where did they originate from? They originated in the Americas and were unknown in Europe and Asia before the 16th century. That means before the 16th century, the countries in, like, imagine an India where we do not eat potatoes or corn. Like these are staple food, right? Makke ki roti and aloo ka sabji, puri, everything we eat with potatoes. But before 16th century, our ancient ancestors didn't even know that these crops existed in the world. After Christopher Columbus' voyage in 1492, which led to the European discovery of the Americas, these spread worldwide. Okay, hence this exchange is called Columbian Exchange. Okay. Now this Columbian Exchange transformed diets worldwide. Of course, as you know how tasty potatoes, maize, tomatoes, chilies, and groundnuts and sweet potatoes are. We eat sweet potatoes raw, or roast them and eat them. Tomatoes and chilies are staples of Indian food, diet, as salads, everything. Corn, makke ki roti, North India, sweet corn, potatoes, chips, sabjis, everything we cannot do without them. Hence, our diets were transformed. Okay, what our ancestors ate was not this. After the introduction, we Indians, basically played around with the recipes and came up with these, which we consider now traditional Indian food. In Europe, especially, the potato became a staple food. Of course, why? Because as you know, the geography of Europe is very dry, cold, arid, and most of the crops cannot be grown. Potato is a very resilient crop that can be grown, and it has a high yield compared to other crops. Hence, it became a staple food for the poor. Like, however poor you were, you could afford potatoes because they have a high yield, supply is large, and people can afford to eat them, and they are very filling food, as they are rich in carbohydrates, so they are a very good source of energy. And okay, now I have mixed up geography and science in it, but basically, why did it become a staple food? Because it was very very cheap, very easy to afford, and very filling food. In Ireland, over dependence on potatoes led to a tragedy when potato disease struck in the 1840s. It caused a massive famine, killing hundreds of thousands. Now, over dependence on something is never a good choice, you know. Like if we are overly dependent on one particular product and it goes, you know, out of stock, you will be anxious. But this is history we are talking about. In history, if we are over dependent on something and it goes out due to inconvenient transportation, large amount of food or that product cannot be transferred, so it can be, you know, life threatening at that as well. Hence, in Ireland, when poor or most of the people were overly dependent on potatoes yield, when a potato disease struck and there was no potato to eat, it caused a massive famine because, of course, other crops were already not high yielding. They were limited in number. Potatoes were gone. So, hence, hundreds of thousands of poor people suffered this famine. Okay, whenever we talk about famine, it is a very common question. Mostly famine only kills poor people. Rich people always have something to eat. We can get an idea of this from French Revolution, but let's not mix things up. Basically, over dependence of potatoes in Ireland caused a tragedy, a massive famine in 1840s because of a potato disease. Okay, and hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Thus, food history reflects deep patterns of migration, trade, and global interdependence long before the modern age. Hence, another example of globalization, early globalization we have here on food history. It tells migration, like from where a food was taken and to which country or which continent it spread to. It is migration patterns. Trade, like which countries were trading from which country. We can also deduce this from food travel. Global interdependence, as we have seen, like Americas produced these and people, you know, took those crops from Americas and took them to other countries, and other countries were able to survive and even overly dependent on these crops. Hence global interdependence long before the modern age, that is the very convenient transport system that we have set up today. Long before it, migration, trade, and global interdependence was already in practice. Now we are moving on to our last chapter, not last topic, that is 1.3, conquest, disease, and trade. These cartoons are very exciting, and sometimes people in board exams do ask you cartoons. You can look through them. It is a very interesting way of studying history, right? Last topic, conquest, disease, and trade. We can move on. You can look through the chapter side by side as well. मोटा मोटा देख लो क्या है इसमें. I have read and made the notes, and I'll just basically explain some to you. You can read it after the video and you'll get a better idea. Okay, we are till here. This cartoon is this chapter. From here onwards, you have to make a project or internal assessment, whatever your school tells you to. Till here, it will be evaluated in your board exam. So moving on, let's start. हमने डिजीज़ की बात स्टार्टिंग में ही कर ली थी. कि डिजीज़ पहले आइसोलेटेड पॉपुलेशन में एक डिजीज़ होता था, जैसे स्मॉल पॉक्स एक बहुत पॉपुलर एग्जांपल है, क्योंकि ये ग्लोबल फर्स्ट बायोलॉजिकल वेपन जो कॉलोनिस्ट ने यूज़ करा था अमेरिकाज की पॉपुलेशन वाइप आउट करने के लिए, इसलिए फेमस है. पहले सिर्फ यूरोप में था, क्योंकि उस टाइम पर इट वॉज एन आइसोलेटेड वर्ल्ड. वैक्सीन स्मॉल पॉक्स की यूरोप में ओरिजिनेट हुई थी, क्योंकि वो वहीं का एक स्पेसिफिक डिजीज़ था. जब आप global world started to shrunk, like in the 16th century world became more connected or shrunk, we can say. ट्रांसपोर्ट बढ़ गया था, नेवी बन गई थी, शिप्स बन गई थी, तो people were traveling oceans and discovering new lands. Hence the world became more connected and shrunk. So when European explorers discovered sea routes to Asia and crossed the Atlantic to the Americas, though the Indian Ocean trade had long been active, Europe's entry expanded and redirected global trade, linking distant continents in new ways. Okay, Indian Ocean trade was had long been active before these sea routes to Asia and Americas were discovered by European countries. Okay, hence it has a very long history. India connected to China, to Central Asia through our ocean trade, long before Europeans discovered sea routes to Asia and Americas. Okay, but now Europe's entry into this play expanded the sea routes. Like now we had sea routes to America, we had sea routes to Europe. Delivery time was, shrunken, so many things that originally could not be transported could be transported. So it expanded and also redirected trade. Like now Europe was active, many things that had to originally pass through Arab, Central Asia to Europe. Now Europe could directly buy and sell through directly with India and China. Hence, distant continents were being linked in new ways. Discovery of Americas transformed global trade. Now why? Because Americas at that time were, a untouched land, basically, you would say. It was an untouched land and home to I don't know how many species of crops. It was a very new land. Europe was all, you have seen the Europe map of Europe, right? It is a very small country. At that time, population was, expanding, and people were, looking for different land to settle on and make their, countries. So silver and gold from Peru and Mexico enriched Europe. पहले हमने क्या बात करी कि पहले सिल्क रूट के टाइम पे हमने क्या बात करी कि पहले गोल्ड एंड सिल्वर यूरोप से एशिया आया गुड्स चेंज करने के लिए. अब लेकिन यूरोप को भी तो कहीं से ट्रेड करना था, तो पीरू एंड मेक्सिको बिकेम देयर ट्रेड हब्स. वहाँ से सिल्वर और गोल्ड आता था यूरोप में. One another point to consider, at that time Peru and Mexico में tribes रहते थे. Ancient tribes, you have heard of Incas and Aztecs, right? वो वाला region, वहाँ पर mines, silver और gold mines discover नहीं हुई थी. They were untouched. Gold rush के बारे में भी सुना होगा ना आपने, वो भी इसी टाइम के अराउंड था. सो अब वहाँ से वो माइन करते थे गोल्ड और सिल्वर जो यूरोप में आता था, और वो उसको हेल्प करता था फाइनेंस अपना ग्रोइंग ट्रेड एशिया के साथ. अब क्योंकि बहुत सारा ऑलरेडी यूरोप का अपने रिसोर्सेज गोल्ड और सिल्वर के एशिया चले गए, बट दे हैव टू कंटिन्यू आस्किंग फॉर गुड्स फ्रॉम देम एंड दे नीड मनी. सो दे European travelers took their ships, went to America, found the mines, mined them, and financed their growing trade with Asia. Now, which also led to myths of immense wealth. Like अभी legends हो गई कि वहाँ treasure है, gold है, तो people leave there, उनका घर बार छोड़ के, अपनी land, अपना घर छोड़ के, got on the ships, got on these pirate ships, you can say, and went to Americas in hope of a better fortune, hoping to make a better future out of their life. स्पेनिश और पोर्टुगीज़ पहले लोग थे जिन्होंने कोलोनाइजेशन स्टार्ट करी ऑफ अमेरिकाज, एंड दे बिगेन इट इन अर्नेस्ट बिकॉज उनको जल्दी थी. दे स्पेनिश एंड पोर्टुगीज एक्सप्लोरर्स डिस्कवर्ड द रूट्स. दे वेंट, एंड नॉट जस्ट थ्रू मिलिट्री फोर्स, दे वेंट विद मिलिट्री ऑफ कोर्स टू ऑक्यूपाई द लैंड, बट ऑल्सो दे ऑल्सो हैव अनएक्सपेक्टेड एलाई जर्म्स. लाइक अभी मैंने थोड़ी देर पहले बात करी पैंडमिक की, उस टाइम पर बायोलॉजिकल वेपन जर्म्स को यूज़ करा गया था to wipe out wipe out whole population, whole tribes of people in Americas, especially smallpox. Now Native Americans, as you know, they were isolated from the rest of the world. They had no immunity due to long isolation, and the diseases wiped out entire populations, which enabled them to conquer the land. Meanwhile, अब उन्होंने लैंड क्यों लेनी थी, उसके पीछे भी एक रीज़न होना चाहिए ना. तो रीज़न था कि पॉवर्टी, ओवर क्राउडिंग. ऑफकोर्स यूरोप आपने मैप में देखा है, बहुत छोटी जगह है, पॉपुलेशन बढ़ रही थी, जगह नहीं थी, डिजीज़ भी फैल रही थी, क्योंकि ऑफकोर्स स्लम्स आपने देखे होंगे, हाइजीन कंडीशंस नहीं होती इतने अच्छे वहाँ पर, तो डिजीज़ आर वेरी ईजियर टू स्प्रेड. एंड रिलीजियस परसिक्यूशन, उस टाइम पर क्रिश्चियनिटी में लड़ाई हो रही थी, इस्लाम क्रिश्चियनिटी में लड़ाई हो रही थी, प्रोटेस्टेंट्स एंड कैथोलिक्स लड़ाई कर रहे थे. Religious persecutions were massive throughout Europe, so that drove thousands of Europeans to migrate to the Americas. Now अब वहाँ पर उन्होंने जगह खाली कर ली. अब वो जो यूरोपियंस थके सताए हुए यूरोपियंस थे, those people who could not live on their lands anymore, they got into ships and went to America to settle down, to make a better future out of themselves. Okay. By the 18th century, plantations run by African slaves have produced sugar and cotton for Europe. अब यूरोप थे तो वो यूरोपियंस ही, वहाँ जाकर उन्होंने बड़े बड़े प्लांटेशन सेटअप करे, शुगर एंड कॉटन, जो यूरोप को जिस रॉ मटेरियल की ज़रूरत थी उन्होंने वहाँ पे वो प्लांट करे। स्लेव्स पकड़ पकड़ के लाते थे अफ्रीका से, तो अफ्रीकन स्लेव्स आर पुट इनटू यूज़ फॉर प्लांटेशन। शुगर एंड कॉटन फॉर यूरोप वर बीइंग प्लांटेड इन द अमेरिकाज। सी यूरोप का इन्फ्लुएंस देखो, उन्होंने ट्रेड करना था एशिया के साथ, उनकी चीज़ें चाहिए थी, पैसे नहीं थे, पैसों की तलाश में वो अमेरिका गए। वहाँ पे उन्होंने सिल्वर और गोल्ड तो लिया ही, जगह भी ऑक्यूपाई कर ली। फिर उन्होंने जो ओवर क्राउडेड जो लोग सताए हुए थे वो वहाँ जाके सेटल हो गए। फिर वहाँ पर उन्होंने अफ्रीका से स्लेव्स लिए और वहाँ पर उनको काम लगाया। सी द अमाउंट ऑफ ग्लोबलाइजेशन दीज यूरोपियंस हैड डन। दे वर ट्रेडिंग विद एशिया, ग्रोइंग देयर रॉ मटेरियल्स इन अमेरिका, and their employees were people from Africa. So what a trade network they have set up, right? Up until the 18th century, अब हमें एक टाइम पे पता था कि इंडिया सोने की चिड़िया है, और चाइना भी उस टाइम पे बहुत ही प्रॉस्परस था। They were still among the richest nations in the world and dominated Asian trade. India and China, two major players, richest nations in the world and dominated Asian trade. But 15th century onwards, जब यूरोपियंस ने क्या बोलते हैं वोयाजेस लेनी अंडरटेक करनी शुरू कर दी, उन्होंने ट्रैवलिंग शुरू कर दी, रूट्स ढूंढने शुरू कर दिए, नई लैंड ढूंढनी शुरू कर दी, तब चाइना ने अपने आप को आइसोलेट करना शुरू कर दिया टू प्रोटेक्ट इट सेल्फ फ्रॉम आउटसाइड फोर्सेज, एंड इट वर्कड। चाइना कोलोनाइजेशन से बचा रहा मेजर पार्ट तक, दो इंडिया ने ये नहीं करा। एंड ऑफ कोर्स वी नो what happened later. We were colonized with the British, and that is another whole chapter, nationalism in India. वो भी आपके सिलेबस में है, और उसके मैप्स भी आपके सिलेबस में है। वील बी डिस्कसिंग देम इन अपकमिंग वीडियोज एज आई सी फिट, ओके। एंड ऑफ कोर्स ना अमेरिकाज की इंपॉर्टेंस क्यों रोज करी। अमेरिकाज एक नई लैंड थे, नया सिल्वर था, अभी अनटच गोल्ड था वहाँ पे आप प्लांट कर सकते थे। उनका क्लाइमेट बेटर था क्योंकि साउथ अमेरिका सदर्न हेमिस्फीयर में पड़ता है, वहाँ पे वो ट्रॉपिकल एटमॉस्फेयर है, वहाँ पे आप प्लांट्स ग्रो कर सकते थे जो यूरोप में नहीं ग्रो सकते थे। हेंस अमेरिकाज की इंपॉर्टेंस रोज हुई। और पहले जो इसकी वजह से जब यूरोप अपने प्ले में आया, तो सेंटर ऑफ ग्लोबल ट्रेड जो पहले एशिया था, चाइना और इंडिया था, वो अब वेस्टवर्ड जाने लग गया, विद यूरोप इमर्जिंग एज अ न्यू ग्लोबल हब। चाइना और इंडिया से यूरोप अब एक मेजर प्लेयर बनकर रह गया। वेरी गुड, वी हैव डन विद आवर चैप्टर फाइनली। यहाँ तक आपको, इस कार्टून तक आपको ये चैप्टर कवर करना है। आप अपनी NCERTs को पढ़ सकते हैं। नोट्स आपने आई होप लिख लिए होंगे, नहीं लिखे कोई बात नहीं, बहुत जल्दी हम इनको अपनी साइट पर भी अवेलेबल कर देंगे। वी कैन कॉपी पेस्ट एंड लुक थ्रू आवर वेबसाइट। थैंक यू, बाय।